Now, this is an exercise that I wish everyone would do with their horse. It's so simple. It requires very little skill and it has so many physiological benefits to it that you really can't say no. I really love treat scatters and I've done these for a really long time, but I've since tweaked how I set them up, having looked at Rachael Draaisma's Scentwork. You can see that I've just placed some supplement lids on the floor. They're basically a visual indicator that there's something interesting for the horse to explore. So, what I want is to place them down, and when the horse sees them, they go, "Oh, there's something over there that I should go and investigate." So, you can use anything to do this. Just make sure it's not something you will use in other areas of your horse training that might create confusion. For example, if you use a cone to do stationary target, don't do a treat scatter around them. You can, with your visual indicators, change the setup so you can make different shapes on the ground. You can place them in different areas. You can use more than three. I've used three here. You might just use one if you've got a horse who has a short attention span or might find it difficult. Get creative and make sure your setup is slightly different every time, just to invoke a bit more curiosity from your horse. Once you've done this, scatter treats around them with a little trail leading from one island to another. I tend to just throw the treats up in the air and they land wherever, although some people like to be a bit more prescriptive about it. I'm using herbal treats here, but you can use any food that your horse likes and you can also cater it to their individual health needs. So, for example, you can use something low in sugar for metabolic horses. And equally, as your horse gets better at smelling around, you can use things with less fragrance just to encourage them to work a little bit harder. Try not to make it too challenging from the get go, particularly because if horses have a negative association to learning, so they've learned to not try, or they've learned to shut down when it gets difficult, you really want to set them up for success. So once you've set your exercise up, you're then going to bring your horse over and set them free to sniff around and find the food. The idea being that they use their nose to find the treats rather than their eyes. So if you can do it in the grass, for example, or maybe even on a stony surface, that would be really good. I wouldn't recommend doing it on a sandy surface because you don't want them ingesting the sand. In modern horse keeping, we don't tend to provide many foraging opportunities for our horses. They have their hay and they have grass, and maybe if they're lucky, they have a little bit of hedge to pick at. But otherwise, they don't get the chance to seek out food, and they often don't really need to use their noses to find it. It's just there, or we give them a bucket feed, and the food is just there for them. But when a horse uses their nose, they use their olfactory system to find the food. It stimulates the feel good hormone oxytocin, which is great for pain relief. And it also releases the neurotransmitter dopamine, which further supports the feel good vibes for your horse. I really like this exercise because not only is it enriching, but I've seen some incredible postural and movement changes before and after, as well as some incredible behavioural changes too. The things that I tend to notice are how horses start to find it easier to access them out and away from the midline of the body. They find it easier to mobilize their necks, and they sometimes practice backing up, or in the act of smelling, they might move their nose between their front legs, and you can see them flex their back a little bit. Also, the act of smelling helps to mobilize the rib cage, and in turn, that helps to flex the back. I really like this from the perspective that the horse can access ranges of motion in their body without us training them. And this can make them feel safer in their body because they can, to all intents and purposes, already go there. But also, we can kind of go under the nervous system a little bit. So if your horse has any areas of tension, we can bring their nervous system down, and then you might find that they start to release that tension and move into that space. And with that in mind, it means that we don't have to work quite so hard to train the movement. The movement's already there. We just need to find an organic way to help the horse to find it, and then attach a cue to that. And I think that that sounds really quite simple from a training perspective. I will also use this in rehabilitation settings when a horse can't do traditional exercises. Perhaps they're on box rest, or perhaps generic cardiovascular kind of movement isn't appropriate for them in this moment in time. And I'll also use it for restoring range of motion in orthopedic rehab cases like kissing spines. I really like to start with this in the horses program before we do anything that directly targets spinal flexion, because it's a nice way of restoring the movement in the horse's body, going under the nervous system. So we're going under the horse's awareness, so to speak, to help them to not perceive any pain or discomfort in their spine, which then makes it easier to access later on down the line. It's also interesting to me how the horse's movement changes over the course of the treat scatter as their nervous system comes down a peg. This horse, for example, is out 24/7, so she was already moving around before this exercise started. And some of you with a keen eye might see that she's not quite so symmetrical in her movement patterns. She preferentially abducts her left fore first, and she sort of props on her right fore and pivots herself around on it. But over the course of this exercise, you'll see that she starts to open up through her right shoulder a little bit more and abduct it a little bit more. She's got an awful lot going on in her body from an orthopedic perspective, and what I really appreciate is the softness that the treat scatter creates through her neck and shoulders. I also like how her spine starts to neutralize and lengthen a little bit, so we've got a little bit of a spinal decompression going on. And then I also like how her withers lift up a smidge as well. It's really empowering to me to be able to help without having to make a big plan or micromanage movement or have a lot of skill available to you. And I personally think that's really fun, because I think if we can do more with our horses where they get to be an active participant and enjoy it, rather than the human saying, you need to do this because it will be good for you in the long run, I think we're going to have happier, healthier, more curious horses who want to show up and do things with us rather than us feeling like we have to make them do things or tearing our hair out because our horse is kind of constantly rejecting us. I've also included a before and after video in this, so you can see this little mare's movement before the exercise and after. There was only 8 minutes difference between the two videos, but you can see that her tension level has come down significantly, and you can see that she's a lot longer and happier to carry her head a little bit lower as well.